Well, yesterday it was the big political moment everyone was sort of waiting for. What was going to be the result of this bullying inquiry against Dominic Raab? And of course, was Rishi Sunak about to sack one of his, well, to be honest, one of his closest allies? And remember, for someone like Rishi Sunak, who we've said before is constantly under siege by various different Tory groups, constantly threatening rebellion, he really needs all the help he can get. However, of course, as we know this morning, Dominic Raab has resigned. Now, we haven't yet seen the full report, so we don't know exactly what these two complaints which were upheld, which sort of forced him to resign, but we'll get into that in a moment, the forced resignation that he claims so unfairly. And I think it's very important that when we have things like this, that there is, and we've seen a number of people calling for a inquiry, a rethink to how we do these, to make sure that, well, our civil servants, in a way, are treated properly and fairly, because this isn't the only bullying complaint we have seen against ministers. And numerous times we have seen that these complaints were either, came through, and then at the time the Prime Minister would then go, oh, well, of course, typically Priti Patel infamously had one where Boris Johnson sort of let her off the hook. But this wouldn't be the first time someone, shall we say, maybe have got off the hook. But Raab, in this case, has not. So this will have a lot of implications, I think, for Rishi Sunak down the road. So rather than talking about the bullying accusations themselves, we're going to talk a bit about Dominic Raab, a bit of his sort of history he's had within the party, and potentially where does his career go next. So before we go diving into this whole case, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And of course, as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel that way. And of course, there is the Pony Club down below as well, and the YouTube thank you button as well. So, Dominic Raab, what a, well, I'd say rise and fall, but at the time when Raab very first sort of came into the office, very much ushered in as one of the new Cameronites, one of these new up-and-comers, he found it very, very hard to make a name for himself out there, with lots of described as being a very dynamic individual within the party, wanting to sort of put forward ideas to essentially the boss, but felt he wasn't being listened to. And of course, this would result in Dominic Raab and a couple of other Tories ganging together and creating the most infamous book that we've talked about on this channel, and again, we have a copy of, Britania Unchained. Dominic Raab was a driving force of that book, saying that Britain should be more liberal with its tax laws, be more liberal with its regulations. And of course, as we've said before, when you look at what they were saying versus what they really want to do, they don't tell you what they really want to do because, well, no one would actually vote for them, because most of these ideas are complete and absolute utter deregulation. And of course, after that, Raab sort of stymied in many, many ways. He was always there at the background in many of the sort of the Cameron years, going off forward through Brexit, through, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, and now sort of Rishi Sunak, probably having certainly the peak, really, of his career, being the Deputy Prime Minister and, of course, Justice Secretary, being, of course, originally put there by Boris Johnson. And even in some cases, apparently throwing a very big hissy fit against Johnson so that he could have the Deputy Prime Minister. So, overall, it has been a somewhat strange career path for Dominic Raab. Someone who wanted very clearly to have power in office, and certainly a lot of high class ideas above his station of how important, how important he thought of himself. Very clearly, it's clear he had ambitions to be prime minister. Those ambitions, certainly after this, I think ultimately are done. And like I say, you can consider this almost an obituary for Dominic Raab's career. Like I say, his whole time as being the Justice Secretary, today being celebrated just this morning by the secret barrister as being one of the worst Justice Secretaries that the UK has ever had, increasing the time rate out of, according to them, purely out of spite for victims of violent crime. You want a reason why the justice system is so bad? Dominic Raab is partly responsible, and ultimately the most responsible for the state of the UK's justice system. And still the Tories continue to destroy that system. And it is something that Labour should go after them on. Even after these recent sort of kerfuffle attack ads, it's still something that Labour should go after them for, because it is an absolute Tory failure. Considering themselves to be the party of law and order, well, they've completely and absolutely failed the justice system, and to be able to deliver justice to thousands of victims of crime. That is something Labour should attack the Conservatives on. But of course, back to Raab. Well, what's next? To be honest, probably I would highly suspect certainly a long stint on the backbenches. There is no way that Raab does not end up back there, being probably once again many of the considered once again a no-hoper. Raab has had his time in the sun barely, briefly, but he really didn't achieve anything. And ultimately, that is where his career will, or at least should, end. Will Dominic Raab ever make a play for power again? It is very likely. He will probably try and hook himself onto maybe this new nationalist conservative movement that we see sort of forming at the moment, with their conference to take place in the not too distant future. It's very likely he might. But is this the last we've seen of him? I don't think so. Like I said before, I think this guy very clearly has a lot higher political ambitions of whatever the position he would like to be. And of course, he'd ultimately like to be Prime Minister. However, being a very, very close ally of sort of Rishi Sunak, he really didn't sort of feel the need to, shall we say, give Sunak the push. Ultimately, I highly suspect he probably waited for Sunak to grow bored and then sort of be appointed almost his sort of political successor in many ways. That's the sense I was certainly seeing this. And of course, what happens to Rishi Sunak? Well, Rishi Sunak has lost a key ally. You know, Raab supported Sunak right from the word go. He was not a initial Trussite. He was fully supportive of Sunak right from the word go. So he has lost a key ally. Will this affect him? Absolutely. Remember, he's already constantly under siege by all these different Tory groups. He's now lost Dominic Raab. He's very, very quickly running out of friends in his own cabinet. And remember, this was someone who could not pick their own cabinet. So who becomes Deputy Prime Minister? Who knows? Very likely the Justice Secretary position will be filled. Very probably very quickly, maybe by the end of today. Certainly over the weekend, I can see that being filled for the Justice Secretary. I don't know who sort of Sunak would pick, but we'd have to see. But as always, thank you very much for this, and thank you very much for listening to what was probably the political obituary for Dominic Raab, because I cannot see him, to be honest, returning to power. And like I say, his actual record for achievements is very, very slim. It is not impressive. It is very likely that anyone would ever consider to bring Dominic Raab back into a position of prominence, especially after I suspect we get to see this full report. So, as always, thank you very much for watching, and of course, we'll see you all next time.